America, the world's greatest democracy, and at its heart, the vote, the will of the people. But how do you know if the vote is counted correctly? And if you don't know, then what have you got? Democracy? This is the story of a small group of citizens headed by a grandmother from Seattle. They set out on a journey to ask one simple question. How does America count its votes? What they found was secrecy, votes in the trash, and how to change the course of history.
Something broken in the promised land.
When people see what's really going on, there's no way we will allow this to continue.
Back in 2000, Al Gore lost the presidential election in Florida amongst the chaos and arguments over how to recount the votes. But no one thought to ask how the computers originally counted the results. As dusk fell on election night, one official noticed something very strange, a sign that the heart of America's democracy was in danger. In Volusia County, Florida, an election computer counted Al Gore's totals backwards. He had negative votes.
Was showing a minus sign in front of the votes that it had subtracted from Gore. I mean, it wasn't like it was trying to hide it. It says there's minus 16,022 votes here.
How could a computer that is supposed to protect the votes of you and me count backwards to give a candidate negative votes? Either it was an error, or someone had tried to rig the election. There was an investigation into the negative votes, and it was established that the problem couldn't have been due to machine failure, because only the totals for the presidential race were affected. It looked like a second memory card may have been loaded onto the computer. Memory cards contain the votes, but this second card had disappeared, so they couldn't check it. The origin of the negative votes was never proved, but some engineers thought that it might have been an attempt to tamper with the election. But no one will ever know for sure. The software that counted those votes was owned by Global Election Systems. In 2002, they were bought by the Diebold Corporation. The software is a trade secret. It's against federal and state law to look inside Diebold's voting machines.
I was the chief technical advisor to the Secretary of State of the largest state in the United States, and I was not allowed to look at the software running in Diebold or any other vendor's voting systems. To this day, I have not been allowed to look at that software.
Software like this is installed in more than 30 states. If someone tampers with it, or it just malfunctions, then the wrong people can win elections. If that happens, hundreds of representatives, judges, and other officials may hold offices they are not elected to. Democrat or Republican, it affects us all. Bev Harris lives in Seattle with her family. A writer, publicist, and grandmother, she knew nothing about computer programming or election systems. But when her county bought a new touchscreen system, she started to ask questions. The answers she got reveal a system in crisis.
You know, I had a life before I did this, and I never really envisioned becoming any kind of an activist or advocate. But sometimes something comes into your life and you know, well, if I don't do it, then maybe no one else will, and then maybe I don't want to bequeath that to my children. I put 3 words into a news search engine, voting machines and glitch, and found dozens and dozens of elections that were miscounted by the machines. And about that time, I thought, we really have a problem.
What Bev had found was that you couldn't necessarily rely on the election results produced by voting machines. In Louisiana, Susan Berniker, a Republican candidate, filmed the proof when she went to check her results on a touchscreen computerized voting system.
This is where I came the day that the warehouses are open to the candidates to inspect. So I came here with an old college buddy. He grabbed his camera, and I asked them to show me how the machine worked. So I just started fooling around with the machine. And it's when I pressed the button next to my name, and then I look down and I see Mr. Gambaluca's name in the display when I press Susan Bernacker. Shall we do it again?
Do it again.
Yeah. Okay, here we go again. I'm pressing Bernacker. Gambaluca shows up. So we went down the row. We probably tested 15 machines, and I said, you know what, we don't have to test anymore. And that is when I said, oh my goodness, this is terrible. We can't count our votes, so how do we know this is right?
Because the casting of the vote is secret, it's rare to get documentary evidence of machines miscounting. But Susan's experience isn't an isolated problem. Computers count around 80% of America's votes. In Tallahassee, Florida, the supervisor of elections, Ion Sancho, wanted to be absolutely sure that when his computers declared a winner, it was because that was the will of the people.
The vendors have entirely too much power in the elections arena today.
This is a screencast of a 2003 fundraising letter written to 100 Republicans by Diebold CEO Walden Odell. In a letter, he said, quote, I am committed to helping Ohio deliver its electoral votes to the president, meaning President Bush. I saw this quote on 2 other web sources, CNN.com and NewYorkTimes.com, but some kind of filter prevented me from screencasting this information. Diebold is the largest maker of e-voting machines in the United States, and the CEO in the 2004 election was advocating for one particular candidate for president. That should be disturbing, seeing as how Diebold software in their voting machines cannot be reviewed by any Secretary of State, any governor, or any local voting official.
Election officials are really overly dependent upon the vendors. Vendors control what kind of technology may be offered in a state. We're essentially hostage to the financial desires of private interests to conduct the most public of our procedures, public elections.
Ion asked Black Box Voting to look at his Diebold optical scan system, and they invited computer security expert Harry Hursti from Finland.
This is a first. We're going to be looking at the machines, the real machines. That's a real system that's actually been used in real elections.
Well, let me tell you what we're going to do today. We have constructed a mini election, but Harry Hursti, as you have served as a technical advisor of how to do this, we're going to ask you to remain outside. What we have here is a programmed optical scan ballot. There is only one question on this ballot. Can the votes on the Diebold system be hacked using the memory card?
I have only touched the memory card, not the other parts of the Diebold election system, which is going to be used today. Only the memory card.
And I can certainly speak for myself and Harry, and that we're going to vote yes.
All right, then let's have the rest of us vote no. 2 individuals, Hugh and Harry, will be voting yes. The rest of us will be voting no. and then we'll scrutinize the ballots afterwards to ensure that that is indeed the mark.
I will say that I'm wrong and Diebold is right, and I'm going to say no, they cannot be hacked.
It's impossible. So I vote no.
I'm going to film myself voting. Excuse me.
I'm going to mark this ballot no. Dr. Thompson?
I am going to mark this ballot yes. Seen some pretty concerning things.
Well, it's down to you. You're the last voter, Harry.
All right. I think it could be. So I vote for yes.
You will be the second yes.
All right. And here is the memory card I have touched.
Okay. Now, this is the only piece of Diebold equipment that you've used.
That's correct.
Well, thank you. Let me take your ballot in. This card will go into this slot. The next activity that the election worker does on the morning of the election is turn the machine on, making it live to receive votes. When you do that, this machine will produce what is called a zero total tape. The machine is going through a self-test analysis, and then it'll spontaneously turn on. This is Harry's card that is telling us that there are 0 votes stored in the memory. Okay, let me get the ballots. Let's insert a yes ballot. We're going to put in another no. 7. And the last no ballot, 8. Placing the ender card in this device and telling it to turn off its counting function and do its reporting function will now cause the voting machine to print out a tape reading the number of votes that it had just read. Oh my.
Oh no! What is it? What is it? 7 yes, 1 no. Oh my!
Hell no, to the no, no, no. Hell to the no, hell to the no, to the no, no, no.
Oh my gosh. Let me see.
Here's the tape.
7 people said it could be hacked.
And we put through 6 and 2.
6
no's
no's
and 2
2
yes.
Oh my gosh, do you know what this means?
How do we know that Harry didn't just change the report and the votes themselves on the memory card are still correct? If that was the case, when they go into GEMS, the results would be different, isn't that right?
I mean, the only way to know that is to read them into GEMS and to check the vote totals.
See what GEMS says. So should we do that?
I think we should, because I want to confirm for my own analysis, is this just a superficial
Right, that's a good
hack? In other words,
question.
Did we just change the words on this paper? And we will upload this memory card
Hell no, to the no, no, no.
If I had not seen what was behind this, I'd have no reason not to. I would have certified this election as a true and accurate result of a vote.
Hell no.
What does this mean for you?
Makes me cry. I'm sorry, but it does.
so many reasons. The reasons because there are people out there who are giving their lives to try to make our elections secure, and they're being called conspiracy theorists and technophobes, and these vendors are lying and saying that everything's all right, and it's not all right. And I'm crying because I'll quote somebody that I know who said that it's as though our country is one country pretending to be another country. How can this be happening to our elections?
They called it backwards. It was simply backwards.
South Jersey voting machine incident makes waves.
It was 2011, and Cynthia Zirkle and her husband Ernie were running in a local election in their hometown of Fairton, New Jersey.
Was this a big deal here? It was. It was both a big deal, but people said, we don't trust the system. And that was sad, very sad.
How did you know you would win this election?
Because I knew 33 of the people that voted for us, and we lost 33-10. And I knew that that wasn't the case.
The results had been switched with those of their opponents.
We started calling people that we thought we knew voted for us because it was just in this district of this township, and we know everybody in this district.
Because people voted on electronic voting machines that leave no paper trail, there was no way to recount the votes.
Do you blame the electronic voting machine?
No, I blame people. And unfortunately, I think that no matter what system you come up with, can be rigged.
This November, millions of Americans will be voting on electronic voting machines. In 5 states, people will be casting their ballots exclusively on touch screens that leave no paper trail, as well as in individual counties in several other states.
When you have an electronic voting machine with no paper ballot, then you're completely relying on the software in the voting machine to tell you who won. And software is easily replaced in a computer, so somebody can replace it with fraudulent software that lies about who won. Now I'm going to unscrew this sheet metal panel.
That's computer scientist Andrew Appel. He knows what he's talking about because he's actually hacked the voting machines himself.
And you see, you don't have to be a computer expert to actually hack the voting machine. So I remove it simply by prying it loose from its socket with a screwdriver. If it's a really close election, then one swing state will make the difference.
So you actually program this to say, this button's for Hillary Clinton, this button's going to be for Trump.
No, that's done by Dominion.
Dominion is the company behind the machines. We reached out to them, but they didn't respond to our request for comment.
Would you prefer that this machine had a paper ballot attached to it?
I think it'd be great if voters could walk out with a piece of paper that said your votes were recorded for these candidates. And if we had the funding to make that available to voters, that would be a great thing.
The federal government actually gave states lots of funding, hundreds of millions of dollars, to improve their voting systems after the 2000 Bush-Gore election disaster in Florida. To try and prevent future problems, states moved away from paper ballots to electronic voting machines. But there was one big issue with the new machines.
It didn't have a paper trail. There was no way to verify how they voted.
Inside this Florida warehouse, there are hundreds of electronic voting machines that won't be used by the general public in November.
Do you understand why voters don't trust these things?
They said that they wanted a paper trail. They wanted to be able to see where their votes, how their votes were captured. And you can't see that on here.
So Florida purchased new machines again for the 2008 election, spending millions of dollars to give voters a verifiable paper trail.
So these are the optical
These are the
machines.
optical scan machines. When a person votes on these machines, they'll put in the paper ballot. If there's a big discrepancy, we can go into that bin, pull out the paper, check the paper again.
So why are voters in more than a dozen states still voting on paperless machines?
We should be able to run elections not worrying about can we trust the results if the computers aren't hacked, but can we trust the results even if the computers might be hacked? And the kind of paper trails available through optical scan ballots give us that assurance. What's important is to get more and more of the states into technologies that are secure against hacking.
As for the Zirkles, they ended up winning their election after a judge ordered a new vote. Still, they have little faith in our electoral process.
When you have candidates that have enormous amounts of money at their disposal, elections can be bought, and they can be bought at the local level in enough places that it will make a difference. And that's my biggest fear.
Can you trust a voting machine that's electronic with no paper trail?
No.
Hell no.
And you can't trust the people running that kind of a system.
Our democracy has been hit by a car. And if we don't keep caring about these rigged elections, then they will never be fixed. The bone will heal all crooked, and then, then we'll walk around like this, and no one will love us. So I want to spend this episode going over everything that supports the idea that this primary election was stolen from Bernie Sanders. Philip Anderson is the founder of Activism Tech, an organization that provides technical and tactical support to progressive protest movements. I talked to him earlier today about our electronic voting system. So let's get into this. These voting machines, a lot of our voting machines are 10 and 15 years old. And just how hackable do you think these things are? Like, especially the older ones?
Yeah, the older ones are extremely hackable in the broadest sense. So there was a recent study by SRI International, which is a sort of corporate intelligence, and they study cybersecurity and other issues like that. And they focused on a few voting machines in Virginia of the older variety.
Okay.
And they were both hackable in the sense that the source code was proprietary, so you don't really know how it's working. There might be bugs. But also the passwords were admin or ABCDE or just password on like a lot of these machines.
So many of the old ones are still in use. They were Diebold machines. Diebold then changed their name to Premier Election Solutions.
Sounds
and then
fancier and more secure.
Then was sold. But Diebold was indicted in 2013 for, quote, a worldwide pattern of criminal conduct.
Hell no.
So basically, it's like Lex Luthor is creating our voting machines. But like, as far as you know, like, what is the accountability that these voting machines with the proprietary code? Is there accountability? I guess some have paper trails.
Yeah, some have paper trails, but there's been issues as well with the actual paper trail itself because how the trail is created is also proprietary. So you input it into the voting machine. It's ostensibly creating a exact replica on a paper trail, but there's a group out of MIT and a few other universities that showed you can actually fake the paper trail. So you can both flip the votes, and then the machine makes the paper trail look like it was the accurate voting system.
So to hack these, as far as you know, would the person have to be at the center with the voting machines, or can it be done from afar? Or?
Yeah, so there's two general types of voting machines right now. One are sort of the Diebold machines, which use essentially a type of USB drive. It's like a proprietary disk to both upload and take off votes for analysis. And those you have to be physically at the machine. You essentially have a corrupted disk. You can insert it into the machine and reprogram it or manipulate the source code. But then there are newer machines that have local Wi-Fi. So you're still within the voting center or just outside of the building, basically the distance of like, a fairly powerful Wi-Fi router. And for that, you don't actually have to be in the building. You could be maybe in a car. Those you can essentially crack the same way you could penetrate any kind of like Wi-Fi network. And then review the source code and maybe upload malicious code.
I remember in 2012, many people believed that the reason Karl Rove, live on Fox News, thought that Romney was still going to pull it out in Ohio and the presidency was because he thought there was a fix on the voting machines.
The exit for Mitt Romney was Ohio, but after Fox News called Ohio for Obama, the network's own best-known commentator objected.
We got to be careful about calling things.
Mr. Curtis, would you please state your full name for the record?
My name is Clinton Eugene Curtis.
And where do you reside?
Tallahassee, Florida.
And what is your profession?
I'm a computer programmer.
Would you please speak into the microphone so the audience can hear your testimony?
I'm a computer programmer.
Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections?
Yes.
How do you know that to be the case?
Because in October of 2000, I wrote a prototype for Congressman Tom Feeney at the company I work for in Oviedo, Florida, that did just that.
And when you say did just that, it would rig an election?
It would flip the vote 51-49 to whoever you wanted it to go to and whichever race you wanted to win.
And would that program that you designed be something that elections officials that might be on county boards of elections could detect?
They'd never see it.
Hell no!
This week, there was there was a Democratic primary in Illinois between a right-wing Democrat, really a Republican, Daniel Lipinski, and a progressive Democrat, Marie Newman. The New York Times was tracking the results as they came in. With 86% reporting, Newman, the progressive, was winning and had gotten 7,112 votes in Will County. Then, a few minutes later, with 88% reporting, Newman was suddenly losing, and her vote total in Will County had dropped to 4,212. I'm Lee Camp, and this is your home for election fraud updates. So right now you're thinking, Lee, in past episodes you've shown us that exit polls prove election fraud. A new study, a Stanford study, did not compare the voting machines to exit polls, but instead compared them to pre-election polls of likely voters. 337 such polls are listed on the database provided by Real Clear Politics, representing 139,231 voters across 34 primary states. This new Stanford study found that while the polls were quite successful at predicting Clinton's numbers in states with paper trails, Clinton overperformed by an average of 9% in the states that use electronic voting machines but fail to provide paper evidence. But Lee, what would that look like in a bar graph? Funny you should ask. It would look like this. And that big red bar, if it were a 5-year-old in a school play, would go, I'm a little election fraud, short and stout. And if you say there's not fraud, get... But Lee, if you're saying the voting machines were rigged, wouldn't that require that someone high up at the voting machine companies wanted Hillary Clinton to win? Funny you should ask. As the study noted, the hacker Guccifer 2 released documents from the Democratic National Committee which showed a list of donors to the Clinton Foundation. 2 of the 3 companies that control the electronic voting market, namely Dominion Voting and HIG Capital, i.e. Hart Intercivic, are on this list of big money donors. Hold on, you're telling me that Hillary Clinton did way better than the pre-election polling only in states that have unaccountable electronic voting machines owned by corporations that donate heavily to the Clinton Foundation? Yes, that's what I'm telling you!
Hell no, to the no, no, no.
The Stanford study used Louisiana as an example. Clinton did 12% better than the pre-election polls, and the Republican primary didn't show any deviation from the pre-election polls. But Lee, what would those results look like as a colorful chart? Funny you should ask. Green means the vote matched the pre-election polling. Red means it was way off in favor of Hillary Clinton. And just like receiving ugly-ass Christmas socks, this should make us very angry. That's why they look like Christmas socks. In this Stanford study, they present other proof that I don't have time to get into now that the primary election was rigged in certain states. But still, the mainstream media refuses to talk about this.